I'm confident that's what holds 99% of entrepreneurs back. Come hell or high water, I am doing this. And I am doing this until the bitter end. Whether we win or lose, I will go down fighting if I have to. We opened our first location in Waterloo, Ontario in September of 2020. And if you'll recall, there was a little pandemic happening and we were in the midst of lockdowns. And I thought, well, that's it, we're done. Necessity is the mother of invention. And so we built this tech stack that allowed us to have our guests check in pre-arrival, pre-regged, pre-keyed, you name it, your mobile device is your key. It was, and again, back to the sort of terrifying, it was terrifying.
It is terrifying.
I thought we were going to lose everything.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I've put a lot of money and time, energy into this, and we're going to lose it all. And instead, you lay awake at night and you cobble together this ridiculous tech stack. And lo and behold, and we started doing business with a lot of the big tech companies. Google, for example, was one of our biggest customers, still is one of our biggest customers.
Social media really distorts our perception of entrepreneurship in a big way, right?
It romanticizes the notion that you too can be Elon Musk.
Exactly. Yeah.
I look forward to Monday morning. How many people can say that? I have grown more in this last 6 or 7 years than I think I have in my whole career.
Welcome to the GROWQUIRE Show. My name is Jennie Gellatly-Valiulis, and I am the host of the show. I am delighted to have a very close friend with me today, Matthew Opferkuch, who is the CEO and one of the co-founders of the Laundry Rooms. We're at their beautiful property here in Cambridge, Ontario. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
I'm excited for today's conversation.
Same here.
Some of the things that we are going to speak about today in the interview, we've talked about before in all of our conversations with one another, but some questions are new. So I'm really excited for those ones. So let's get into it today.
Super.
Why don't we talk first about taking that leap of faith into entrepreneurship for you? Because you have spent decades in the luxury hotel space as a very strong demonstrated operator. And then you decided, I'm going to go ahead and form a partnership group and launch this fantastic brand called the Laundry Rooms. How did you make that leap?
Yeah, I think, if I'm honest, I think it was always there. And I always had this sort of fundamental desire to operate my own business, to own my own business. And I think really, if I look back and I'm being honest with myself, I think it was really a question of overcoming the fear. And to your point, I mean, I had a great job, a great career, great income, a very comfortable lifestyle. We enjoy all the trappings of being a quote unquote luxury hotelier. It's not without its benefits. And the thought of sort of giving that up and stepping out into the unknown was always, there was always this desire, but to actually make that leap, I think I'm confident that's what holds 99% of entrepreneurs back. In my case, it was 100% fear. Whether that was founded or unfounded, though, it was, remains, I wouldn't say remains to be seen, but it was, in retrospect, unfounded. Let's put it that way.
I want to drill down a little bit here.
Sure.
Because everybody knows that fear is what's holding you back. But let's talk tactically. Like, what were the tactics you used? What happened? What was your breakthrough moment where you were like, enough, I'm going to stop holding myself back and I want to move forward? What did you do differently to release your fears?
I'm not sure, and we'll talk a little more about sort of releasing fears or overcoming or channeling fear and anger and all those emotions and how we channel those into sort of more productive outcomes, let's say. But I would say that the real motivation, unfortunately, was probably having been, I don't want to say mistreated, but perhaps having learned over the course of, several decades of being I'll say an employee, that you get taken advantage of. And there's just, I don't know that there's any way around that. We talk a lot, not in my business, but businesses in general talk a lot about, we're family and all of that. It all sounds great and it makes for, wonderful sound bites and kumbaya. But the reality is you are an employee until such time as you are not. And, I almost liken it to sort of this matrix moment. We're all, as employees, and myself included as a young employee, I aspired to be, the general manager of the Mandarin Oriental in Bangkok. That was always my sort of guiding star. But, over the course of 20 years in corporate life, I learned that it's not necessarily the pinnacle. And the pinnacle for me was this sort of independence and the freedom that comes along with, the fear of the unknown in terms of being an entrepreneur.
You said some really interesting words when you started answering the question. You said, well, we'll also talk about channeling the fears. I think that's probably an easier concept, at least for me, to grasp, because if you're trying to just shove fear down, when you try to shove feelings down, it doesn't really work. It kind of backfires. So what did you do to shift and redirect the fear to use it to your advantage? Because fear can be a very powerful tool if you're pushing it on the scale in the direction that you want.
Yes, yeah.
How did you do it?
Yeah, fear and anger, I would say. How did I do it? I think I realized probably a year, maybe 2 years in, I reached a point where I had a really fearful moment, and we can get into that in just a moment, where I thought, okay, we're going to lose it all. And my natural sort of compulsion was to either turtle and just internalize all that fear. And I think I did for a period of time. In fact, I know I did for a period of time. And then I had this sort of epiphany, and I woke up one day after another fitful sleep and realized that this was not the solution. And I would just sit and turtle to the extent that my business would go bankrupt, and that simply I wouldn't allow that to happen, full stop. And it was in that moment that I sort of picked myself up and I thought to myself, you know what? Come hell or high water, I am doing this. And I am doing this until the bitter end. Whether we win or lose, I will go down fighting if I have to. And it was really in that moment, and that was a couple of years ago, and my partners would probably recognize that moment, that I realized that, okay, this is now my raison d'etre, and I am going to do this no matter what. And since then, I've managed to channel that fear and channel, in some cases, anger, and again, we'll get into that, into a really productive outcome. It doesn't mean I don't feel fear. I certainly feel fear. There's still days when I think, oh my God, we're headed for disaster. But I know now to, first of all, sit with it, process it, and then make a truly conscious decision to channel that fear and that energy into something productive.
I love that answer. I think everybody can relate to that, and it's a much more productive use of very strong emotions.
It is. And it's something that, I think my daughter's generation are learning this much more than I ever did, let's put it that way. She's much more self-aware than I ever was. And I do think that, at my age, I'm in my 50s, the fact that I'm still learning and learning myself to a large extent is kind of remarkable. It's also part of what I love about being an entrepreneur. And it's been a real eye-opener, truly.
So let's talk a little bit about, we're talking about taking the leap of faith into entrepreneurship, which you did several years back now. And part of the motivating factors for you was you just didn't want to be an employee anymore. I think that resonates with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give someone who's considering stepping out, taking a leap, and becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I guess I have the I have the benefit of hindsight. And I did, if I'm being completely honest, I did have I was able to step out as an entrepreneur in the sense that I did some consulting work, but it was still very much, it was within, a business that I know, with people that I know. And so I'll say I dabbled as an entrepreneur. And it wasn't until I left my employment at Pearl Hospitality and stepped out as completely on my own as an entrepreneur and as a consultant that I started to realize that, oh shit, this is not how I imagined it. And then I came to meet my current partners, Scott Hickens at Hip Developments, and Jason Cassis, and the folks at the Laundry Design Works. And we came up with this crazy concept of the laundry rooms. It's an industry that, I'm a hotelier by trade. This was a short-term rental business. It's not a huge leap. On the other hand, to go from being, quote, luxury hotelier to now operating my own business, who knows where my next paycheck is coming from, assuming there is one, having to juggle paying the bills and truly building a business from the ground up. And you've got there's no lifelines. There's no, it's his fault, it's her fault. It's all your fault. It's all your fault. And that, that's something that takes some getting used to.
Yes.
Every aspect of this business, ultimately, I shoulder. And it's not to say I have great people. I'm really lucky. I really do have great people around me. But at the end of the day, it's my responsibility.
There is a big gap between what you envision owning a company to be like and what it's actually like.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
I'm agreed. I heard her say this recently and it really struck a chord. She said, I wish more people would understand my life. She's one of the famous founders of Skims.
Oh yeah.
With Kim Kardashian.
Sure.
I love following her work. But she said this recently and it struck a chord with me. And she said, I really wish people would just understand what my daily life is like. She's one of the richest self-made women in America. And she said, every morning I wake up and there's problems. All day long I'm problem solving. And if you want to wake up every single day knowing today's another day to problem solve, then go for it and be a serial entrepreneur and start all kinds of things. But it's not like you just wake up in the morning, you roll out of bed and the birds are singing and some person brings you breakfast in bed and it's problem-free, set it and forget it type lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And I think that social media really distorts our perception of entrepreneurship in a big way, right?
It romanticizes the notion that you too can be Elon Musk.
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely. It is, and you're absolutely right. It is all-consuming. It really is. It permeates into every aspect of my life, nights, weekends. And I don't want to say, I shouldn't say, I'm always working, and I am, but I'm also having a lot of fun.
Yes.
And I know that may seem sort of counterintuitive to a lot of people because, when I was an employee, I couldn't wait for the weekends. Although I'm in the hotel business, weekends didn't necessarily mean much, but regardless, couldn't wait for those days off so that you could, completely sort of shut down and go spend the day with your family and friends and so on. These days, I am rarely away from my laptop or my phone, which is a bit of a problem, I'm not gonna lie. But I also, I really do love it. We talk a lot about, hey, this weekend, let's go paddleboarding, let's do this, let's do that, whatever. And in the back of my mind, I think to myself, geez, I'd really like to work on that pro forma.
Oh, that touches my heart. That touches my heart because I am pro forma queen. I love pro forma. So yeah, especially because modeling is so fun because if you're looking at a pro forma, it means you're working on either investing in a new business, refinancing and restocking your capital, or coming up with a new vertical that would completely change your business. So you want to tell us what pro forma?
There are several on the go.
Yeah, it's exciting because, once you launch, and I know, let's talk about your new venture. Why don't you share a little bit about it?
Sure. Propeller Hotels, we are a hotel management company. I'll say in the conventional sense, yes, in that we offer sort of the same or similar services as a conventional hotel management company. With that said, we have taken everything we've learned over this last 5 or 6 years with the laundry rooms, which has been, and again, I'm a lifelong hotelier. I thought I knew sort of more or less everything there was to running a hotel. We took a very tech-forward approach, as you know, to the laundry rooms. Built a very unique tech stack that allows us to operate hotels virtually completely remotely, right?
Yes.
We choose not to do that for several reasons, and we can get into all that. But I learned a great deal over that five or 6 years. And I recognized as the sort of tides shifted in relation to short-term rentals and interest rates, and it became obvious that, or apparent that, the laundry rooms was going to continue to grow, but not nearly, as quickly as we'd hoped in the early days. But I knew that those learnings could apply to what I'll call conventional hotels. Hotels, they're effectively a real estate play. They move very slowly. Owners of hotels, generally speaking, understand real estate. They don't necessarily understand what I'll call retail. And retail, as you probably, well, I know you know, retail is a different animal, and it moves much more quickly than I'd even considered. I had no idea how quickly things change, whether it's brands, whether it's products, whether it's how these businesses operate. It is evolving continuously.
Yes.
And so now we take these learnings from this crazy little short-term rental business and apply it to hotels, and we're able to operate a hotel extremely efficiently, much more efficiently than a conventional hotel management company, and we're able to deliver a better NOI for our asset owners. And so I did the math, let's say, and recognized that, okay, short-term rentals, that door's not closed, but it's not as big an opportunity as we'd originally hoped. Now we shift our attention to management, and I'm happy to say we're about 6 months in, and we've signed our first 3 agreements.
That's a high five for those of you listening.
And 2 of the 3 are with nationally recognized, like big developers. So I'm really happy, really proud of sort of how far we've come, and opportunity abounds.
Wow, that's exciting. I think that the opportunity abounds for sure. You've got a big runway ahead of you because of your tech stack. Like I've had the pleasure of working with you very closely before. A couple of years ago, we were working very closely together. What's really interesting about your model, because of your tech stack, you are significantly lower as a percentage on your labor line on your pro forma than most standard hotels.
Yeah.
Your facilities don't require the same level of on-site personnel. So there's so many cost savings that you could bring to asset owners and hotel owners. So congratulations to you for launching that. It's really exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it really does go back to sort of what I love doing best. I was a hotelier within the sort of, I'll say, the corporate machine. I never really fit in. I'll be honest. It's not that I was unemployable, but I wasn't the best employee. Let's put it that way.
I think every entrepreneur would say the same thing about themselves before becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I remember just being, sort of in this, here's your sandbox, this is where you will play. And I remember having this moment years ago. I worked for Fairmont, and I thought to myself, but I want to talk about big picture.
Yes.
I want to talk about how we market this place and how we, continue to grow revenue and so on. I don't want to play in my little box. And I had realized even before that I have to set out and do my own thing at some point or another. And I'm a late bloomer as an entrepreneur. I realized that. I think the business I'm in, hotels, I'm not sure how many opportunities there were in my 20s to go out and, okay, I'll just open my own hotel. So I give myself some slack, let's say, for being a late bloomer. But
I wouldn't call you a late bloomer. I have to interrupt you here, because most entrepreneurs, like a lot of entrepreneurs, start in their 40s. Yeah. So I wouldn't say you're a late bloomer.
I guess. And maybe I just wish I'd done it sooner. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's better said.
Yeah, I really do. I wish I'd done it sooner. But, kids, mortgages, all that, all that fun stuff gets in the way.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. So let's talk about building from zero, because when you launched the laundry rooms, it was like such an interesting time in the world. It was also pre-COVID, if I recall correctly, too. Like, what year did you launch the laundry rooms?
So we founded the company in 2019.
That's right.
We opened our first location in Waterloo, Ontario in September of 2020. And, if you'll recall, there was a little pandemic happening, and we were in the midst of lockdowns. And I thought, well, that's it, we're done.
Yes.
Right? We're insolvent, and, we've burned through a lot of time, money, and cash, and I'll have to find something else to do. And as a hotelier, 2020 was looking pretty bleak. Fortunately, it was also the catalyst, I think, to some extent for us. Because we promptly had to pivot and create a tech stack that allowed us to operate remotely. We'd have to be able to welcome guests to our hotel and do it in such a way that we're not standing, directly opposite them. And so necessity is the mother of invention. And so we built this tech stack that allowed us to have our guests check in pre-arrival, pre-regged, pre-keyed, you name it, your mobile device is your key. And our service delivery was also effectively remote. You send us an SMS and, your pillows arrive or your bottle of wine arrives or whatever the case may be. It was, and again, back to the sort of terrifying, it was terrifying.
It is terrifying.
I thought we were going to lose everything.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I've, put a lot of money and time, energy into this, and we're going to lose it all. And instead, you lay awake at night and cobble together this ridiculous tech stack. And lo and behold, I still remember checking in, myself and my director of sales, Chris, checking in our first guest in Waterloo in September of 2020. And fortunately, Waterloo is, the tech hub of Canada, really. And so we had a lot of early adopters, people that are quick to adopt to new technology and new ways of doing things. And we started doing business with a lot of the big tech companies. Google, for example, was one of our biggest customers, still is one of our biggest customers. And they adopted this sort of tech-forward hoteling very quickly. And despite everything, the lockdowns and so on, we were actually operating at one point at 70% occupancy in the midst of lockdowns.
Incredible.
Just crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And yeah, totally terrifying to start a business, open your first property September of 2020 in Canada.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, because we had such strict lockdowns, and it was like, we're open for business, no lockdown, close your business again. And we had these cycles in the hospitality industry of open, shut, open, shut, open, shut. And so people who were highly staffed in restaurants and hotels were constantly going through layoffs. Oh, come back, and then you're trying your hardest to, at minimum, retain your management teams during this crisis. Mm-hmm. So a lot of those things were averted. And it's interesting because some of the best innovative ideas come out of enormous shifts in the economy and like global geopolitical, everything going on in the world,
100%.
Right? And you guys were scared, but you did it anyway. And you found the solutions anyway.
We did.
And you stayed up all night anyway, discovering new tech stacks anyway.
Yeah.
And that all resulted in what we know as the laundry rooms, which is an incredibly cool design-forward brand. And what I love about it is it offers me privacy. When I'm done reaching my destination, I don't want to have to make small talk with people.
You are now officially preaching to the choir.
I do not want to have to talk to you. I might want to just be like in my pajamas at that point. I might have gotten changed at a Tim Hortons somewhere. I don't want to talk to anybody. And so you've removed that, and the suites are really pristine and beautiful and make people feel like they're at home, and they don't have to have that obligatory social interaction. Yeah. However, there are people on site if you do need to reach someone.
Absolutely.
So that combination is special. You've said, traditional hotels don't compete with Airbnb. We do. So what do you see the key differences being between your offering and traditional hotels?
Well, a couple of things. You touched on it. That sort of DIY nature of our business, let's say, the do-it-yourself nature. Again, conventional luxury hotel guy. There's no way we can generate 5-star reviews without a concierge, a bellman, a doorman, a valet, a spa, you name it. Fast forward to where we are today, our reviews are consistently 4.8 or better across our entire platform. And yet it is effectively a DIY stay. Because, and you touched on this, and this may have been one of my biggest epiphanies actually through this whole sort of adventure, is exactly that. I remember several years ago, I stayed in a hotel in Miami, beautiful hotel. It was a Marriott, it was W, I think it was, doesn't matter. It was a big convention hotel. And I roll in after, 4 or 5 hour flight, I'm tired, I'm hot. And now I've got to line up with 30, we're 30 people deep to get to the front desk. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I just want to get to my room. And then I do in fact get to my room and I realize, I've forgotten, I don't know, a toothbrush or something. And now I've got a call and, I talked to somebody who's ESL in housekeeping. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, and I just want like a toothbrush. Instead, in our case, you literally arrive at the property, you walk straight to your suite, you tap your phone, you walk in, you need anything, you send us an SMS and it arrives. I personally love that. I love hotels. You have no idea, it's in my DNA. I love hotels and I love luxury hotels and I know how hard people work to deliver great service. And I'm not discounting any of that. There's a time and place, I think, for both. If I'm going away for a weekend, I really want to pamper ourselves. Of course, we want sort of high touch and, all those services we just talked about. But oftentimes, I just want to get to my room and I just want to lay my head down. And if I need some pillows or toothpaste, or if I can just send you an SMS and I don't have to speak with you, that would be grand.
The simplest things. So you guys have done a great job meeting those needs for sure. So you've had great success creating a completely different guest experience within a segment, hotels, that you love so much. What would be your most controversial, unpopular opinion about what traditional hoteliers are unwilling to accept to transform their business and improve their P&L and progress?
Again, I think we just touched on it, Jenny, if I'm honest. Coming from a conventional sort of luxury hotel background, I was extremely proud as the general manager of a hotel. I was extremely proud of the service we deliver and all the various touch points, the guest touch points that are so important. I never would have imagined, 7, 8, 10 years ago, before launching this business, that you could deliver great guest service, great customer service without all of those touch points. So if you'd come to me, I was the general manager of the Hazelton Hotel, for example, roughly, 20 years ago now. If you had come to me 20 years ago and said, Matthew, you could do this without a concierge and without a bellman, there's just no way. I would have thought you were somehow attacking my business and attacking my people, and I would have immediately gotten, defensive, right? And launching this business effectively wiped the slate completely clean. And now all of a sudden, I'm a business owner, which is very different even from being a general manager. Because as a general manager, you're often, defending the decisions you're making to an owner. Now I'm in the owner's seat and I'm concerned with my money and my investment and my business. And it's a different perspective. But by wiping the slate completely clean, it also allowed us to really focus on the guest. And the feedback that we continue to get, but certainly that we got in the early days, was really what helped inform our business. And the fact that we got so much positive feedback based on what is really I'll call it a limited service model, is remarkable. And it was striking. It was striking then, and it's still striking now. Overwhelmingly, we get positive customer reviews. Our occupancy and our average rates speak volumes, and the reviews speak for themselves. And so, it became very clear that we were doing something very right, but also very different.
Yes. You can really get stuck in defensiveness. And that will prohibit you from making progress and innovating, especially if you've been doing it a certain way for so long. Like you said, if you could talk to your former self, you'd be like, I can't do all of these things with all of these team members. What? So instead of that knee-jerk reaction, it'd probably be better to just pause and go, there could be something to this, right?
Absolutely.
And not switch, just try to just pause before getting defensive, because if you're going to be extremely successful as an entrepreneur, the more feedback you're open to on a daily basis, the better. You're smiling because you know how true this is.
100%, absolutely.
And your guests are giving you feedback every single day. Your team members are giving you feedback every day. Your leadership team, everyone, your stakeholders, your shareholders, everyone's giving you feedback every single day. So the more open and receptive you can be to receiving what people want, if you just give people what they want, you will take off like a rocket.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know, years ago, a mentor of mine used the term, show me a complaint and I'll show you a customer. And, initially I sort of thought, what the heck does that mean? But if someone takes the time to tell you how to improve your business, it's all a matter of perspective. Initially, if and when we get bad reviews, and we do from time to time, we're not perfect, I take it personally. I really do take it personally, and it's hard. It hurts. And, my initial reaction is again, it's that sort of, natural, I guess, instinct to sort of turtle or get angry, and which, again, is just not constructive. And so, his advice, or his observation really, was just to flip the script and to understand that, okay, this person is not attacking you personally. They are telling you your business has a problem, and I'm giving you an opportunity to solve that problem.
Yes.
And it's just that little shift in how you look at it that changes everything. And so we take our reviews, as you know, extremely seriously. We respond to every review, and we want to make it right at the end of the day. You've heard me say that our reviews are effectively our brand. They really are our brand promise, and I would say we make several brand promises like any brand, and what the reviews do is really, I'll say, authenticate those promises. Are we delivering on the promise of great service? Are we delivering on the promise of cleanliness, of all the standards that we sort of tout? And so we look at those reviews as opportunities.
Absolutely, they are. You talked about your mentor gave you that piece of advice. I loved his words of wisdom. If you had to give your younger self a piece of advice about becoming an entrepreneur and coaching and guidance to that younger version, what would you say?
Yeah, my initial thought was, don't be afraid, but the fear is real. And there's, to tell someone not to be afraid it's sort of really counterproductive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. Like, of course you're gonna feel fear. I think it would be, do it despite the fear. Live with the fear, and and again, it's easy for me now, I'll say in sort of hindsight, having lived through a lot of that fear. I truly had no idea, even when we set out to do this, just how hard some of those moments would be. But I have grown more in this last 6 or 7 years than I think I have in my whole career.
Wow.
Absolutely, and I don't say that lightly. And that's also, I think, what I love most is I get to grow every day. I get to learn every day. I often joke with my teammates, my colleagues, and I say, like, I could be working in the corporate machine and playing solitaire right now and counting down the days till I get that pension, which so I think so many of us do. I really do. But I get to play every day. I get to play with the people I like. I get to do this.
Yes.
It's not a matter of, genuinely, I look forward to Monday mornings. How How many people can say that?
Not many.
Right? I look forward to Monday mornings because I get to hit the ground running again and you know, get to do it all over.
Oh, it's so
Yeah.
great.
I'm so, like, I really, and I know it sounds so cliche, right? But I'm genuinely lucky I get to do this all the time. And part of, I think, another aspect that I love about owning my business, I watched my father retire. He was an engineer by trade, German engineer. That's a whole other podcast. But I remember, you know, he retired and it almost immediately took 10 years off his life.
Wow.
There was just that sense of, I think, maybe lost to some extent, but also that sense of purpose. And, you know, let's face it, I think every one of us, all of us, look for that sense of purpose. And people find it in all different ways, right? I mean, whether it's with your children, whether it's in your hobbies, whether it's in your career, whatever, you know, whatever the case may be. And for me, I really think I found my sense of purpose. And the fact that I can, you know, I own it, and God willing, I'll be able to do it for as long as I care to. And I think, like, I don't want to retire. You know what I mean?
That is the best gift.
Right? I want to do this for as long as I can.
That's rich.
Right? It is. That's 100%.
That's rich.
100%. Yeah. And I always, you know, I always thought being an entrepreneur would be sort of a destination, right? Like, okay, I've made it. You know?
Look at me.
Look at me. Now I can go off and golf and fish and I don't know, whatever. You
Everyone
know,
else will do everything.
Whatever people do when they retire, I suppose. But it is not, it truly is not. And again, it sounds a little cliche, I guess, but it really is, it's the journey. It's every day. And you touched on this earlier, you know, every day I wake up and every day there's a problem or 10. And every day I get to solve them.
Yes, it's fun.
Right? It really is. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you my closing question. I ask all my guests the same closing question. So in as few words as you can, up until this point in time, what have been the highlights of your life?
Wow.
Everybody makes that face too.
Yeah, the highlights of my life. Gosh. I mean, there have been several highlights. You know, I mean, of course, my daughter, you know, watching her graduate both from high school and more recently from university. And, you know, now she's off tree planting. She just got back from Costa Rica, scuba diving. She's off to law school. You know, my heart bursts, right? I'm so full of pride and love for her. That's a kind of a given. And despite all of the challenges and setbacks and so on that, you know, that we've experienced with the laundry rooms and now more recently with Propeller, I can honestly say that it is top 3, certainly, of my life, 100%. I've grown more over this last 7 years than I probably did over the last 30. And, you know, I have, I think, a better understanding of who I am. Certainly, it has opened my eyes to the world, I would say. I do think, looking back, you know, when you're just a cog in the wheel as an employee, it does feel a bit like the Matrix. You know, you're sort of,
Yes.
you know, you've got these blinders on and you just kind of go through life. It's not until you come out swinging and you do it on your own that you realize that the battle is endless and it is real.
Yes.
You know, and it is fun. It really is.
Such a good answer. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. And I know everyone's going to love listening and watching this.
Oh, thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
All
Thank
right.
you.